Welcome to Loyalty Discussions with White Label Loyalty, where we cover everything you need to know about customer loyalty, retention, and rewards. We're interviewing experts from all industries to help you keep your customers coming back for more. I'm really excited to be joined by Dr. Aulona Ulqinaku, Associate Professor of Marketing and Programme Director of the MSc in Consumer Analytics and Marketing Strategy at Leeds University Business School. Aulona's research focuses on financial and psychological threats and how these affect consumer behaviour. This episode will be particularly relevant to all those interested in how customer behaviour is changing during the current cost of living crisis and how different factors can affect brand switching. Let's get into the latest research on consumer behaviour and discuss how your brand should approach marketing at this time. Welcome, Dr. Aulona, and thank you for joining us.
Hello, Helen, and thank you so much for having me.
So to get started, could you explain to listeners what is meant by financial and psychological threats in your research?
So basically, to have a discrepancy or to have psychological threats or financial threats, it means that there is a difference between the normal state where you expect to be and the actual state where you actually perceive yourself as being. So I want to emphasize that this does not need to be objective. We are talking about subjective feelings most of the time. So I may be financially very well objectively, but if I perceive myself that I'm not at the level where I would expect to be, then there is a discrepancy that creates what we call financial threat, for instance. The same with psychological well-being. If I perceive that I should be at this level of psychological well-being, but I feel like I'm slightly below it or significantly below it, even if I'm surrounded by 50 friends, if I don't see the quality of these connections, for instance, I will perceive some subjective loneliness that will create some kind of psychological threat. So I hope that's clear. That is basically what creates the discrepancy or the threat, both in terms of financial threats or psychological threats.
Sure. So depending on how someone perceives their own kind of financial or psychological threats, that will affect how they behave as a consumer and how they spend their money at this time?
Absolutely. So there are very clear psychological, but also social antecedents to financial well-being or psychological well-being. Obviously, there are also some very important either physiological, psychological, or consumer-related consequences of the state that we are experiencing in terms of financial or psychological well-being. Looking at them differently, for instance, I will behave differently if I am being told that your annual income is lower than that of 95% of the UK working population, for instance. That will create in me most of the time financial threat. I will perceive myself as not being able to meet all of my financial needs. Hence, I will behave as a consumer differently from when I'm not perceiving this type of threat. For instance, I will show preference for more, paradoxically, for more non-necessary things rather than necessary things. I will react more positively to specific types of brand communications rather than others. And I'm happy to make them more concrete as we chat. Similarly, research shows that when you are experiencing, let's say, loneliness, or when you are reminded that life comes to an end, or when you are reminded that we are not included in some social activities where we would be expecting to be included, we will reflect, we will mirror all of this in the decisions that we make as consumers. I will spend more on, let's say, on the university hoodie because I want to feel part of the community. Hence, I'll be more willing to spend money on that. Or I will be more willing to take risks, even if they are illegal risks, or like consuming, for example, illegal drugs, if I want to feel included in that group because I was perceiving myself as lonely or as socially excluded. Or if I'm reminded that, for example, what we call mortality salience or fear of death, let's say you hear on the news that there's been an attack somewhere, or someone that you know may be diagnosed with something that just makes you feel anxious about life. You will overspend in luxury products, you will binge eat more, you will drive more recklessly, you'll take more financial risks. All of these are consequences of either our financial well-being, subjective well-being, or psychological well-being. So this is why it's very important for us to look at all of the consequences of both financial and psychological threats, because the consequences as consumers are most of the cases unhealthy one, negative one. So we need to do something as researchers or policymakers or marketeers or practitioners to break this link between the negative state and the negative behavior.
Right. So I think it's so interesting how closely tied in it is with emotions. So how people are feeling at this time and how that affects how they behave. I was reading something recently about how you can kind of generally segment purchases into different categories. So for example, you have your essentials, let's say food and medical care, and then you have things that are considered a totally unnecessary purchase during a time like this, maybe things like entertainment subscriptions, and how it obviously depends per consumer where you would categorize these different products, and also how these things can shift. So someone might consider something to be an essential item at one point, and then that moves into a different category, or vice versa. So another example I think of is gym memberships. Some people might consider that totally unnecessary because there's other ways to exercise and to get movement in. But to another consumer, depending on, what threats they're feeling or where their emotional state is, that could be an essential because it ties so closely to their well-being.
So what happens is that we're looking for coping mechanisms when we're feeling threatened.
Mm-hmm.
These coping mechanisms have to be something that you indulge in, something that takes your mind off the negative state that you are experiencing. It's kind of like you want to eat your feeling away, or you want to buy the feeling away. You have a void and you have to fill this void, and you want nice things in order to fill this void. Hence, we have found, for example, as you were mentioning before, that when you are financially constrained, you will spend more money towards buying things that you don't actually need rather than things that are pure necessities. It may be because you want to take your mind off. It may be because you want to convince yourself that you are not experiencing that type of financial threat. It may be a pure coping mechanism, compensatory consumption, in order to mitigate the type of threat that you are feeling. It's very difficult that you feel a void with something that is unpleasant or negative. It feels like hard work when you are already being depleted by the threat that you are experiencing. So my point.
Sure. So essentially the kind of key message for businesses and brands here is to try to get into the mind of their customer. Really, it's a great time right now to put your customers under a microscope. Try and really understand what they're feeling, what they're going through, and kind of approach the way you do marketing with a lot of empathy. So this is not the kind of environment where businesses with a sell mentality will thrive. Yeah. Customers are being more particular in where they spend their money, and they're looking for brands who can communicate with them in the right way.
So it's absolutely important to not to exploit consumers in this period where we are feeling that there is unemployment, that there is struggling to meet the end of the month. So we have to be more ethical at this point as marketeers, as practitioners. We cannot exploit consumers that are vulnerable already by trying to sell them even more. What companies could do is create this type of win-win situation between I make you feel better as a consumer, by kind of mitigating your threat, by understanding what you are experiencing and giving you customized products or communications or services that are going to make you feel better. So reestablish again that normal level of psychological well-being or financial well-being. And when I make you feel better as a consumer, you will be happier with what I'm offering you. You will be more loyal to me. You will choose my brand over another. So it creates kind of more ethical and stable relationship where companies do get their win because they will get more loyal consumers or consumers who choose them versus other brands. But on the other hand, you are making the consumer feel better and you're not exploiting them by, let's say, making them spend also the last pennies that are left at the end of the month on things that they don't need. That's the important thing. As practitioners, we need to understand that different threats lead to different types of behavior, to different types of preferences. Hence, we have all the technological possibilities nowadays to understand by what you're Googling, by what music you're listening, but what pages you're browsing, what is your psychological or financial state. By understanding that, I mean, they already collect all of these cookies, all this information about us. Why not make a good use out of it? By collecting that, I can understand how Helen is feeling today, how Aulona is doing at this period of the month, and bring them customized messages or communications that it's going to remind them that I'm a brand that cares about them. I am a brand that understands them, what they are feeling, what they're going through. Hence, this is what I actually do to come and let's say save you out of this situation or reestablish the normal equilibrium.
Mm-hmm. And that all comes down to a brand's ability to build relationships with their customers. Something that I really value is when brands can be honest and kind of demonstrate that they're operating with the best of intentions. So, for example, we all know that prices are climbing up, and I have seen some brands who are more upfront about the way they communicate with their customers and tell them that there's going to be price increases and sort of explain to customers why they have to pay more and how it works. And I believe that those are the kinds of brands that are going to be able to connect better with their customers during this time.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, consumers are not unintelligent. Consumers know what they were paying, especially if they were loyal to some brands. By being cheeky and increasing the price, or worse, reducing the quantity that you were offering, you are just going to make them angry. You are going to make them switch to another brand, even if it's not the best option for them. But because they feel fooled by the lack of honesty, as you were mentioning, they are going to react. So as consumers, we have a huge power that we are going to use the moment that we feel that there is a lack of communication between the brand and the consumer. As you were mentioning, like, we keep receiving emails about prices going up only on things, it feels to me, mostly on things that there is no way out. Like, my nursery fees have gone up, and obviously they will need to communicate that because it comes out of the direct debit. But I appreciate them saying, you know what, they're going up by 10%. This is why they're going up, because inflation has gone up. We want to pay our carers at nursery more. The prices of, I don't know, baby wipes and nappies and food, they've all gone up. Our rent has gone up. Hence, this is where the 10% that you're paying extra is going to go. If I go, on the other hand, at, let's say, one of the main retailers, and I see that the baby wipes have gone up because I used to buy them, let's say that I've been buying them for years, and I know exactly how many I was getting and what I was paying. I see that the price has gone up, the quantity has gone down. That just makes me feel like there is breach of the trust that there was between the consumer and the brand. So communication is key, and communication has to be customized to the trait of the consumer.
So what can you take away from this? If you're a brand that sells products and services that would typically be considered a luxury purchase in a recession, don't worry. Consumers are still interested in purchasing such products because it acts as a coping mechanism to help them get through when they're faced with financial threats. Having said that, tread carefully with the marketing messaging you're using right now. Don't exploit consumers in a recession. With many customers now struggling to make ends meet, we have to be more ethical as marketers and use empathy in our marketing strategies this year. As a business, you can mitigate the level of threat your consumer is facing by firstly understanding what they may be experiencing and feeling, and also offering personalised products, services, and communications. When offerings are not personalised, businesses risk creating consumer anger by pushing people to buy things that they do not need and spending their last pennies and pounds on products they don't usually buy. However, when you have the data to know your customers' preferences, you can give them personalised recommendations that are actually relevant to their needs and desires. It's all about getting closer to your customers and understanding them on a deeper level. This also includes being more honest and transparent with your customers. For example, give them a heads up and an explanation of any upcoming price increases. Remember, consumers aren't stupid. They will know if you are exploiting them during this time, so approach your marketing messages with empathy, personalisation, and transparency. These approaches will lead to more loyal customers who will choose your brand over others. Thanks for listening to this episode of Loyalty Discussions with White Label Loyalty. You can follow us on our LinkedIn page to keep up with all of our best loyalty resources.